Story now. Cosatu is the latest to weigh in on the controversial SA Tourism Tottenham Hotspur deal. The Trade Union Federation says it's alarming that SA Tourism CFO Johan van der Walt has reportedly admitted to a relationship with the agency involved in the R1 billion deal. Cosatu says the revelation must be investigated. It's calling on government to halt the deal until everyone involved can give more details on the conflict of interest allegations. Let's speak now to Matthew Parks, that's Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator. Good evening, Mr. Parks. Thank you very much for your time. This one most certainly needs a bit of clarity insofar as the CFO possibly being linked to the middlemen, because if we all remember, in that presser, the CEO had stated that there actually would be no agent or middleman in this particular deal, even though the presentation, a bit later on in that presentation, indicates that there will be an amount of around 31 million that would go to a middleman. And now you're saying there should be a thorough investigation. Talk to us about this.
Yeah. No, thanks for having us. I think we must appreciate the media for exposing this scandal. It's unbelievable. You know, after a decade of state capture and corruption crippling the state across the country, and all of us seeing what corruption does to the state in terms of, you know, the damage is done to Eskom, Transnet, etc. It's so unbelievable to see this kind of story. The whole deal is rotten from head to toe. It makes no sense to give R1 billion in a government which is cash-strapped, which can barely afford to pay public servants a living wage, to hand over R1 billion to a rich English club with no due diligence, no explanation about how much would you get in exchange for that investment, etc. And to make it even more shocking is that the acting CFO, it's not even a permanent CFO, it's an acting CFO for a period of 7 months, admits that he has financial links, he has done business before, he has received income before from the middleman, who apparently they insist will be paid 31 million rand by the end of March. And the bravado of the SA Tourism Board acting leadership, again, is acting, not even permanent, to insist that this makes sense, is going to go through, and even having the chutzpah to say that, well, the president himself will announce it in the State of the Nation address. So they think they can just simply dictate to the entire country how workers and taxpayers' monies are spent. They can simply ignore all the financial regulations and government which govern how public funds are spent, the budgetary process, etc. They think somehow they can just dictate to the Minister of Finance, to the President of Parliament, which has not even approved this budget. It is beyond bizarre. It's shocking. Us as naked corruption that a person who is alleged, and he apparently admits it in the media, according to quotes directly, would benefit from this scheme. It just doesn't make any sense.
It seems he has no appreciation, apologies for interjecting, but it seems he has no appreciation of the conflict that arises if indeed he's a director of several companies linked to this particular agency.
No, exactly. I mean, it seems that the people who are acting in SA Tourism have no moral compass. They have no sense of how to manage public funds. They have no sense of accountability. And for the chair of the SA Tourism Board to go and give a public tirade, to think he can bully a country of 60 million people on how their money should be spent is just beyond belief. We think a couple of things need to happen. One is that board must simply be removed. Those persons who are acting should go immediately. We should not be allowing people who are acting, who will bear no consequences for what they do later on, to have any decision-making powers in such instances. Let's put it under administration. Let's get a proper government authority to go through it, put a halt on all the expenditure, because we really need to see, is this the only element of possible corruption or the other instances? And I think right now, given the kind of brazen approach of these individuals, it would not be shocking to see there's more elements of corruption there. They seem to have no sense of reality, that they think they can spend a third of an entire government entity's budget on some bizarre little scheme. I think there's much more to be found there. I think the NPA, the SAU should be tasked to go and investigate from head to toe. Let's see who is stealing what, how do they steal it, why are they stealing it. But I think we need to put systems in place right now. I think it's also quite worrying that the Department of Tourism has been missing in action on this issue. Do they have no sense of control or accountability of the entities that report to them? We also need to see where exactly is the Minister of Tourism. Is she still around? What exactly has she been doing? Because all we've seen from her is a little bit of a flip-flopping press statement saying, well, she was briefed, she wasn't briefed, she doesn't know about it, she doesn't know about it.
We understand that there's now some sort of a high-level briefing. We understand that there is some sort of a high-level briefing, so perhaps soon enough she will address the nation. But in other developments, there are 3 board members that have since stepped down. One would say perhaps there's an appreciation on their part of this moment, that many South Africans are quite upset or disappointed in the choice or the timing to enter into such a deal. Your reaction to the resignation of those three?
We think that's positive and we welcome that. And I think we appreciate that there are some people who have a sense of conscience, who don't want their reputation, their integrity tainted by a really shocking scandal, possible serious corruption, or wasteful expenditure at the very least. So I think that's possible. And I think that's an indication that there are people on the board who don't accept this deal. We need to welcome those persons. Some of those persons we do know have got a history in the tourism industry. And I think they would have a better sense that this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense why a country with limited finances wants to go on a spending spree, bailing out a rich English club simply to put two little words on a sleeve of a soccer team. Makes no sense when our soccer teams in South Africa, when many local companies are struggling to get funding in the tourism industry.
But the CEO was very adamant that we shouldn't conflate the issues plaguing the country now with the mandate for them to revitalize the tourism sector here, that we've got to distinguish between the two. Yes, there are issues in the country, be it Eskom, be it unemployment, but they also have a mandate, and that this budget must be used to revitalize the sector.
We would agree that the budget should be utilized to revive the sector, so let's give it to struggling SMEs in the tourism sector who have been crying for the past 3 years to get any sort of relief from the Department of Tourism and who have been met with deaf ears. That would be a useful thing because you have many little boutique hotels in townships who would love to get such benefits. You have many struggling little hotels in rural towns who would love to get such support. So that would be a useful thing. But to go and bail out a very rich English club makes no sense. Not when South Africans are struggling, not when the state is struggling to pay nurses an increase, not when the state is struggling to provide an SOD grant for people unemployed. So the acting CEO, we don't think is qualified to lecture South Africa on anything. In fact, the sooner that he goes, the better, because South Africans are correctly irritated by the cavalier sense by some idiots in government who seem to think it's correct to blow the money on vanity projects. We had a much smaller but equally embarrassing episode last year when the Department of Sports and Arts and Culture thought it makes sense to spend 22 million rand on a giant flagpole and put lights to light it up at night. Again, we have to appreciate that South Africans are struggling. They have lost wages, many of them have not received increases, they're struggling with record fuel prices, with repo rate hikes. They don't appreciate to see governments being reckless with the funds. We think it's very positive that the president of the country himself has come out publicly and dismissed this as a nonsensical idea which is not going to go anywhere. We have also had engagement with other ministers in the cabinet who have assured us that this project won't see the light of day. But I think for us as Cosatu, we want to keep pressure on government to make sure this doesn't happen. And I think to begin to instill a sense of culture in government about how money should be spent and how it should not be spent. Government entities cannot spend money if it has not been approved by Parliament. And this little get-rich scheme hasn't been approved by Parliament. So in essence, if they go through with it, it would be illegal.
Mr. Parks, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's Matthew Parks, Parliamentary Coordinator at Cosatu. We take you back to this story.